Chapter 4, Section 2, The Plantation World, From a Society with Slaves to a Slave Society. Bacon's rebellion had frightened large landowners. Remember, Bacon's rebellion was a rebellion led by a group of former indentured servants rebelling because of a lack of land available to them once they had worked off their indentured servitude and had become free. The planter elite decided more African slaves would be better than having indentured servants. The planter elite wrote new and harsher slave codes and imported more African slaves. The harsher, stricter slave codes ensured more control over workers. In turn, we see slavery become linked to race, with Africans seen as slaves. We see children of mixed race declared to be African slaves, and we see free blacks become endangered of being captured and sold into slavery. The Atlantic slave trade, the Middle Passage, and the nature of colonial slavery. North America was just a small fraction of the slave trade. Larger populations were transported to the Caribbean, Brazil, and New Spain. Many enslaved Africans were victims of warfare. They were captured as prisoners of war and sold into slavery. The high demand for enslaved Africans sapped Africa's strength and had a negative impact on Africa's population. African slaves were treated poorly. The slave trade robbed enslaved Africans of their self-respect as they were sorted and branded. Slave marriages weren't recognized by law, and families could be split up. Enslaved Africans led extremely hard lives, filled with harsh treatment, long hours, and living with slave owners who were free to treat slaves as they pleased. The fear of slave revolts, South Carolina and New York. The information for the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina is on the left. The information for New York is on the right. For the Stono Rebellion, Spain had offered freedom to all fugitives who escaped from British territories, made it to Spanish Florida, and converted to Catholicism. These newly freed slaves offered Spain a line of defense versus Britain, and taking slaves disrupted the British economy, which also helped Spain. 50 slaves from South Carolina gathered together to leave their plantations. They burned plantations and killed white plantation-owning families on their way to Florida. South Carolina called on their militia, which fought against and defeated the escaped slaves at the Stono River. This led to stricter slave codes, including laws that prevented slaves from assembling. New York City was a tense place in 1741. The New York governor was paranoid about slave revolts, so he blamed slaves for the fires that swept through New York. Prosecutors were convinced that fires were a plot to kill whites, and as a result, 30 Africans were executed. Please pause your video and answer these 3 review questions.